Susan.
Thank you. No pressure. I'm Richard Barber. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My sponsor sponsors hundreds of people everywhere, and I don't know most of them. I know some of them, but I don't know most of them. So if there's any derelicts in this crowd, just make sure that I'm reported that I was wearing a button-down shirt and a coat when I spoke tonight. That's necessary, okay? Ross asked me to do this a while ago, and I thought, I'm not gonna think about what I'm gonna say too much. I am gonna open with one thing so you guys know what you're getting, all right? When I was about 11 years old, my dad was pretty good friends with the guy that ran the Egyptian consul in San Francisco. And he asked my dad to come to Europe, bring his family, and he'd give us the whole history of his country. My parents were excited, and I would have been, except I was drinking already. And there was a cute little girl down the street, and I just knew that if I was left alone in this beautiful home that my parents had with a built-in pool, all this stuff, that my life was going to change. And so I remember having all these parties, and I remember all this stuff, and probably about 20 years old, I'm living on the streets in Reno. And for some reason, that thought came up into my head. My parents made me do all sorts of stuff I didn't want to do. All sorts of stuff. They should have made me go to Egypt. Because if I went to Egypt, I would have got interested in the history, and I wouldn't have ended up living on the streets. And for the next 20-something years, that bothered me. I got sober when I was 32. My dad died when I was 39. I'm going to cover that, I hope, in the amends, if I remember. My mom and I got really close. And one weekend, I'm up at my mom's, and I'm talking to her, and I say, Mom, I really regret not going to Egypt with you guys. And she looked at me and she goes, what in the world are you talking about? And I go, well, when I was about 11 years old, you guys went to Egypt for 3 weeks? And she goes, no, we didn't. And I'm like, this is my whole foundation of being a screw-up, right? And I go, what are you talking about? But my mom's sharp. My mom doesn't drink. She never used drugs. She was sharp as a tack right up till the day she died. And she goes, no, I remember the trip. We wanted to go. But you were whining about it all the time. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And finally, your dad said, I'm not going to take the little SOB. He'll make our lives a living hell the whole time we're gone. And I'm sure in the hell not going to leave him alone at our house. So we didn't go. And I was like, wow. And as I was driving home the next day, I thought, man, I wonder how much more of my life that didn't happen the way I thought it did. I ain't the only one that's happened to. All right? But that's what I did, is I based my whole, I make up stories in my head, and I based my whole life and blamed everybody but myself. I never took responsibility for my actions. So I'm not going to talk very much about my drinking. You guys all probably drank as much or more, or did other things as much or more as I did. What happened with me is I was broken. I was broken from the time I was born. I didn't know why I didn't fit in. I just didn't fit in. And so when I found alcohol, it was like I pursued that with a singleness of purpose. I wanted to be high all the time. And my parents didn't drink, but they had a huge bar because they entertained. And so my mom was so unconscious of alcohol that one day when I was a little kid, I remember her saying, hey, help me clean up after this Christmas party. And she was just pouring all the bottles together. And I go, isn't all that stuff different? And she goes, oh, it all tastes like crap anyway. Nobody's going to know the difference. So I had this really fantastic childhood, except I was broken. And I kept doing really tragic things. My dad really believed in his family name. He had come from very humble beginnings to a very successful man, and he was very proud of his family name, and I was just this little tyrant that just drug it through the mud. And I just, no matter how much road he paved with gold in front of me, I just went down every dark alley and every back street, and I got caught for shoplifting, stolen cars, just stuff that, before I was 16, before I was even a legal driver. And my dad he couldn't understand it. He didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. My dad used to look at me and he'd go, "What the hell's the matter with you?" And I remember looking up at him thinking, "I don't know. You're the big person, you tell me." Because I knew something was wrong with me. When I was 22, I was they call it couch surfing, but I was just being a bum on a friend's couch. And this girl walked in, and she thought I had something to offer. And we ended up being together for the next 12 years. We had 3 kids. It was the worst relationship I've ever heard of. We were just emotionally, physically, psychologically, any way you could be, horribly rude to each other. We were. And the only thing good that came out of that was those 3. We ended up having 3 sons. We moved up to Susanville in 1987. By 1989, I had been arrested because I was doing a lot of illegal stuff. And on a first offense, I swear to God, a first offense, for $130 worth of drugs, I got sentenced to 6 years in prison. They were serious in Susanville at that time. And I went and did 3 years, 4 months. I got out. I thought, well, I ain't going to be like all these buddies of mine that keep going in and out of prison, I'm just going to get off parole, and then I'm going to get out of here. Well, a few months later, they raided my house. I wasn't there. Somebody told me, "Hey, the cops are looking for you." Some really important stuff started to happen for me. I was walking down the street, hiding from the cops, walking on Main Street, and a guy picked me up that I used to drink a lot with, and he said, "Hey, man, how you doing? You look really rough." He'd been sober for about 6 months, and I go, "Yeah, I ain't doing very well. You probably shouldn't be seen with me." And he goes, "You know what you need to do? You need to pray to God for help." And I said, "Well, I don't even believe in God. Let me out of your truck." And so the next day, though, I got picked up. And that night, as I was in jail, I was going back to prison. I knew that. I got down on my knees and I said, "Man, God, there's got to be more to life than this. If you'll get this monkey off my back so I can be some kind of father to those 3 little boys, I'll do anything you want." Nothing happened. I went to bed. I don't remember if I slept better that night or anything, but I ended up going back to prison, and a couple really important things happened there. My 3 sons had been, my ex-wife had gotten them out of Child Protective Services. They were there for almost 3.5 years. They were with her for, I think, 6 or 7 months. I had seen them for a few months while I was out, and then right after I got busted, she got busted again, and they took them away, and I got a letter from Child Protective Services saying my kids were in long-term foster care again. And I was like, man, she can't do nothing right. She's just and unbelievable. And I wrote the judge a letter. We only had one judge in Lassen County at the time. He knew me pretty well. I've been seeing him on a regular basis. And I wrote him and I said, "Hey, look, I'm tired of this. I'm sorry about this. I'm gonna when I get out, I'm gonna reunify with my kids, and you don't have to worry. I'm not gonna be with her anymore." Just this arrogant letter. And a couple weeks later, he took the time to personally write me back. And he said, "Mr. Barber, these kids have been under my custody for almost 5 years. You're one of the lowest forms of filth I've ever seen as a parent. You haven't done one single thing in 5 years to make me think that I would ever let you see these kids, much less reunify with them." And I was pissed. I was pissed. I went out to the weight pile. I showed my buddies out there. I'll kill him, I'll do, but for whatever reason, I believe it was that prayer I said in the jail cell a few months earlier, I got my moment of clarity. And my moment of clarity was, he's right. I haven't thought about nothing but myself my whole freaking life. And those 3 little boys, they don't have a chance. They don't have a chance. And so I didn't know what to do. And a couple weeks later, it was back in them days, to this day, it's kind of still the same way. You kind of hang out with people from your county while you're in prison. It's kind of, we all ride in the same car. Well, Lassen County, we only had a bicycle. There was me and one other guy. And we were walking around the track, and he said, I'm never coming back. I'm never coming back to prison. And I looked at him and I go, yeah, nobody wants to come back, but how do you do that? And he said, have you ever gone to AA? I go, does that work? And he goes, F yeah, it works. And I go, the guy's an absolute liar. Absolute liar. But for whatever reason, I believed him. And I thought, when I get out, I'm going to go to AA. And I got out. My first stop was CPS. I asked to see the director. I showed him the letter the judge had given me. And he said, given the history that you have, the law says he has to give you a chance. But he don't have to give you much of a chance. And if you want to be in these kids' lives, I suggest you go to AA. I was like, wow, that's weird. And I started going to AA. And right away, I knew the answer was in here. I knew the answer was in here. Now, in 1994 in Susanville, there wasn't a lot of talk about the steps. There was a lot, wash the coffee cups, come early, set up the meeting, shake hands, all good stuff to become involved in the fellowship. But there wasn't a lot of talk about the steps. I know this is going to be hard to believe. I was pursuing Janae, and I said, hey, there's this big thing going on in Reno. Would have been the Spring Fling in 1995. And she said, well, can't exactly just you and me go, but we went with a carload of us. And there was a guy named Bob Olson. And he got up at a podium and he said, I can show you how to stay sober for the rest of your life, if that's what you want. And I was like, wow, that's really arrogant. And he went and gave the best 50-minute talk I've ever heard on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, man, I want to do that. I really, really want to do that. So I'm standing here tonight to tell you that I'm an alcoholic, because once I start drinking, I don't have any control over how much I take. I don't even try to control it. I don't like to control it. Wrecked cars, waking up with your face so bloody that it's glued to the sheet and you got to pull the fibers out of all that shit's pretty fun to me. I kind of like that stuff. So I never wanted to not be high, because, man, when you take away alcohol, I can't live in this skin. I couldn't. And I just can't control it. And so I'd look at, they used to have the steps up in the Susanville Fellowship. It's now across the street where we got sober. And I'd look at those steps, and I think I was doing those steps because I was reading them and thinking about them. And I heard a guy one time say, if you do the steps off the wall, you got an off-the-wall program. And I agree with that, because that didn't work for me. And I thought that when God was going to restore me to sanity, I thought, I'm not carrying a gun no more because I'm on parole and I'm going straight. I'm not being violent or doing all this crazy stuff. And that has nothing to do. That behavior we're going to take care of in the next steps. But the insanity that God's going to restore me from is to think that I can put alcohol into my body and somehow control it. That's insane. The most insane thing I ever have done in my life, I've done stone cold sober. It's thinking that I'm going to drink that drink and something good's going to come of it. Or at least nothing bad. Something's going to happen. And so I applied myself. I had a real hard time with God. I went to Christian school. I had kind of done what it said in We Agnostics. I had abandoned the God of my childhood. And by abandoning the God of my childhood, I thought I'd never look for God again. I had no idea that you could go looking. I mean, I was told that was the only God there was. So I just kind of, but I started about a year and a half sober, going to what is my home group, Thursday Night Westwood, about 20 miles outside of Susanville. And there was 4 people there. There was Jackie, who's my wife's sponsor. There was a lady named Mary, who has passed away. There was Larry, that ended up being my sponsor for 15 years, and there was John. And I'd have done anything on earth to have the power, peace, happiness, and the sense of direction that those 4 people had. And all 4 of those people talked about God. And they all had different gods, radically different gods, really, by my standards. And so I started searching for God. I started with the group, and then I started searching, and I'm still searching today. A lot of stuff happened, man. In 1995, I was an N number, and an N number is a narcotics offender, and it was literally, other than the Supermax guys that were on a certain type of parole, nobody discharged an N number. Nobody did. It just didn't happen. Most guys stayed out 3 months, went back, stayed out 3 months, went back. I discharged my N number. And that judge that was never going to give me my kids back, 2 months after that, I guess I was probably 22, 23 months sober, he gave me full custody of my 3 sons back. And that wasn't me. That was God. And you can't deny when those things start happening in your life, that God is working in your life. My first inventory, like I said, there wasn't a lot of people talking about the steps. And I had a guy living with me, and my kids hadn't come back to live with me, and he said, if you don't do that 4th step, what's going to happen is you're either going to start lying about it, and that'll get you drunk, or you're going to quit going to meetings because you want to quit hearing about it, and that'll get you drunk. So you got to do it. So with very little guidance, I opened my big book, and I just wrote this story out. And it wasn't a very good 4th step at all. It was the best I could do. I shared it with my sponsor. He was very dismissive. I say everybody does that stuff. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But I heard Bob Olson, and I started listening, and I started searching. It took me till I was 5 years sober till I found a man that would read the book. We started at the preface. We read the foreword where it says to show others precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And we read every single word. And when it says pray, we pray. When it says write, we write. And when it says we make amends, I made amends. So I'm writing my inventory, probably the 3rd one I've done at 5 years, and it's the correct way to do it. It's laid out in the big book really, really clearly. And I got a lot of relief from that. My dad's last words to me were, I don't know why God lets people like you live on the face of this planet. And I had no words to reply to that. My sponsor told me to write him a letter. And I wrote him a letter. I got no reply. And then a few years later, I'm working with the guy that ended up being my sponsor for about 15 years. And I was like, I really feel like I got to do something with this relationship with my dad to fix it, because I'm thinking about it too much. He goes, well, write him another letter. No reply. He said, look, write him a letter of everything that you don't think he knows that you've done. I go, fuck. That's a book. I mean, you know. And so I wrote him a pretty long letter, covered most of the bad stuff. And I got no reply. And then when I was 7 years sober, my dad he was a little farm boy, and he had a tractor, and he was doing something to a road, and the road collapsed, and the tractor flipped over on him, and he died. And I never got to see my dad. And I'm going to tell you this, that if my old sponsor, JR, had been my sponsor, or if Bob had been my sponsor, that crap wouldn't have happened. You know, they would have said, you go to the gate, you walk the 3 miles past the gate to hit your house, knock on his door, and make direct amends. And it was one of the only regrets of working the steps that I didn't have. I was like, because I asked, and they said, no, he has every right not to see you. All the stuff you've done to him, he probably doesn't ever want to see you again. He has that right. But that's not what our book says. So I'm writing my inventory. I want to jump forward to about, I think I was 13 years sober. Doug invited me to go to a men's retreat that I go to every year up at Alta. And that guy, Bob Olson, that had such a powerful message for me, he was the speaker that year. And he was talking about the 4-step, and he said, you know, the big book says we listed people, institutions, and principles with whom we are angry. And I was like, wait a minute, I've never listed a principle. I didn't even know what that meant. And a principle is something from which everything else stems. We're like, if I think I'm a piece of garbage, that's all my actions throughout my life is going to reflect that. If I think that I'm never going to amount to a hill of beans, you know how much stuff I never tried in my life because I thought I was going to be a failure before I ever started, so why try? Because I'm tired of being a failure. And I started writing on principles, and I found out a lot of hidden stuff about myself that I really resented about myself. I really resented. I wanted to go through one of them. When I was a kid, one of my jobs, we had a lot of dogs. We had show dogs and hunting dogs, and we just had a lot of dogs. And my job was to clean the dog crap out of the pens. And I let it go for a few days, and I was cleaning the pens, and I was like, man, this thing's getting heavy. And I got to the last pen, and I just flipped it over the fence. Well, we lived in the Santa Rosa Golf and Country Club. And when my dad came home, he sees all this dog crap out in the street with sawdust on it because we put sawdust in the dog pens. And he comes and he goes, "Did you throw that dog crap out in the street?" No. And usually he'd get really, really mad when I lied to him. And he just looked at me and he shook his head and he goes, "Son, if you do things half-assed in your life, you're never going to amount to a hill of beans." And you know what? That's really, really good advice. But I didn't hear that. I heard, "You're never going to amount to a hill of beans." And see, I already felt like that inside. And to hear that from my dad, I had no idea how much that affected me. So I didn't try to do a lot of things. If I wasn't going to be good at it, I wasn't going to even try. If I didn't know, and most things you got to learn, right? You don't, nobody's an expert at anything. Well, except screwing up. And I was good at that. And so when I started finding those things out about myself, I'll tell you a funny one. I always had this belief that if I really told you who I was, you wouldn't like me. If I really told you deep inside how petty and judgmental and spiteful and just what a thief, and just, you wouldn't like me. So I wasn't aware of that at 13 years sober. Me and Janae had been together by that time for about 11 years. And I looked at that and I said, well, why do I believe that? I've always had really good friends. I've had really close friends. Why do I believe that? And it was just I'm just not enough stuff. And I took it through the inventory process and I said, well, where's that selfish? Well, it's selfish because I'm not allowing myself to open up to people, to really open up. Where's it dishonest? Well, it's not true. Plenty of people. I shared everything I could think of with several sponsors by that time, and a few sponsees. They all seemed to like me just fine. Where's it self-seeking? What allows me to be different? allows me to keep you at arm's length. And where is that fearful? Well, I don't want to be known because I don't want to be rejected. The funny thing is when people would try to help me or get close to me, I would think, you dumbass, you don't even know who I am. Well, no kidding. I never tell them. I only tell them so much. They know that much, but they never knew, hey, man, he's got a lot of fear in him. He's got a lot of self-centeredness in him. He's got, I tried to put on a facade, like it says in the fifth step. So, I don't do that anymore. I am who I am. And I'm okay with that. And most people are okay with that, and some people aren't. And you know what, I can't control that. I want to talk, man, that clock's going slow. I want to talk about the fifth step because so many guys that I've sponsored over the years have had so much trouble with the fifth step. And it's, there is a world of difference between telling your sponsor every single thing that's on your inventory and every single thing but one thing. You might as well not even do it. If you're not going to go all the way, there's no sense in doing it. And it's like Bob said at that first meeting in 95, he said, look, it's not like you're making stuff up. If it has a name, somebody else has done it because they at least got to name it, right? And probably half the people in this room have done some form of variation of that exact behavior. You think you're the only one that stole out of your mom's purse, or you're the only one that had that weird sex stuff going on or anything? We all did all that stuff, right? So it really is important to get completely clean. Pick somebody that you trust, that has shown themselves to be trustworthy, and tell them everything. When I get to step 6, it's pretty easy for me because I look and I go, man, I'm selfish, I'm self-centered. I think the whole world, everything that happens is because it involves me being in the center of it. And my shortcomings are that I can't see it. My shortcomings mostly is that I can't. Early on in my sobriety, I was so angry. I didn't get a lot of relief those first, 9 years, 10 years, and I kept doing the steps, and I had some pretty good guidance between 5 and 9 years. But see, I was doing pretty good except in one area. I had sponsored some guys, and I had one guy's still sober that I sponsored when I was 2 years, but he doesn't come to AA anymore. I don't know if he was really a real alcoholic. But a lot of guys were going out, and I got frustrated. And then I got frustrated with the fellowship that I was going to in Susanville. I was still going to my home group, but instead of going every Thursday, I was going 2 Thursdays a month. My sponsor had moved from Westwood to over by Chico, so I wasn't seeing him as often. And if you'd asked me, I wouldn't have told you that I was getting ready to get drunk. But the fact of the matter is I don't know how I stayed sober. And God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And one night, I'm at my home group. There's only 4 of us there. And this guy comes in. And he is pitiful. I mean, great big guy, 6'4", 240 pounds, and he's crying. And it's just embarrassing. And he's got snot coming out of his nose. And he's not doing anything about it. I'm like, here's some napkins. And he's just like, well, yeah. And I'm looking around and I'm going, man, I'm the only guy here that's going to talk to him after the meeting. God, I don't want to do that. I want to go home. So I go out and I talk to him, and he's telling me all of his problems. And I go, dude, look, man, where do you live? And he goes, I live in Chester. I go, you got a ride? He goes, yeah, Mom's coming to pick me up now. He's in his 40s. And I go, wonderful. I said, hey, give me your phone number and give me your address, and I'll come by and see you tomorrow. August 4th, he celebrated 21 years of sobriety. And that saved my life. He says that I saved his life. We fight about it every August. I started sponsoring him, and he shared at our birthday meeting Thursday. He said, I didn't think my sponsor was any too smart, because I was telling him, I just got arrested. I was threatening to kill myself and my ex-wife. I left my kids alone in a motel room, and he's saying, we're going to read this book. And he's going, well, how's that going to, we got to fix this. No, I don't know how to fix that. We're going to do this. And, I have this saying, this is mine. I made this up. So if you use it, I want a little bit of credit, right? The answer is God. What's the question? The answer is God. What's the question? And, man, we did 12-step calls. I was over, I drove 70 miles round trip 3 or 4 times a week. Another guy over there, he asked me to sponsor him. And then it just went crazy. And where I'm from, we live in a small town. When you sponsor somebody, we meet every week. My sponsor sponsors hundreds of men all over the world. And I rarely talk to him. He said, look, kid, if you have something going on, just say red alert, text me, red alert, call me and leave red alert, and I'll get right back to you. But I don't have anything like that going on, so I don't really contact my sponsor that much. I'm lucky if I see him a couple times a year. But all the guys that I sponsor, we meet every week. Some of them every other week. And it's not a big deal. If somebody's, hey, I'm going on vacation or something like that. But I want to stay in contact, not because I'm going to keep them sober, but because I want to know what they're doing with prayer, meditation. I want to know if they're helping another person. I want to know why they're not sponsoring somebody if they've been sober for a while, because that was the deal. Because when somebody asks me to sponsor them, I say, hey, are you willing to go to any length? And they always say yes. And I say, well, this is what any length looks like to me. We're going to start meditation today. We're going to start learning how to get quiet and listen to God today. We're going to start praying today. We're going to start reading this book, and we're going to do what it says. And you got to make me the deal that when we get further along and somebody asks you for help, that you're going to help them. Because this is just my opinion, even though it's right, that if you're not sponsoring somebody, if you're not sponsoring at least one person, you're asking God to work miracles with both of his hands and his feet tied behind his back. Why would you do that? The joy, the freedom that I got when Kyle and I started working together opened my life up. And it allowed me to do things that I never thought I could do. In the big book, it says in step 8 that we make a list to people who are willing to make amends. It says we did it when we took inventory. I've written a lot of inventories. I do one every year. I just started going through the steps 2 weeks ago. I'll be writing inventory in 2 weeks. I have never personally had a resentment or owed an amends where I didn't have a resentment behind it. Because I'm the type of guy that if I borrow a couple $1,000s from you and you want it back, I'm mad at you for loaning me the money. I am. You know what? So I've always had it. But I've had guys that have had, have owed credit cards or something. They go, I'm really not resentful. Well, you still got to pay it back. So put it down on your amends list. When you start making the direct amends, it's like the 5th step. If you're not going to do all of it, it ain't going to work. If you're going to keep one thing hidden, my ex-wife, I can't even describe to you how horribly violent that relationship was on both sides, but especially on mine. And I went to make amends to her, and that was my most difficult amends. And Jose was my sponsor at the time, and Jose said, he says, well, you got to make amends. You got to make amends. You got to make amends. And I go, she's going to start yelling at me. She's going to start screaming at me. She's going to start calling me every filthy name in the book. And nothing good's going to come of it. So why do I have to do it? Because it says to do it right here. So he goes, look, Give her 30 minutes. Give her 30 minutes. You know, you make your amends to what you've done, the harm that you've caused her, and then give her 30 minutes to do whatever she needs to do. And I tell you what, that I was looking at my watch as often as I'm looking at that clock. She just let me have it. And you don't have any idea, Bobby. And I listened to it, and I was good. And finally, at 30 minutes, I go, well, look, we're not going to get anywhere doing this. But this is the amends that I'm going to make to you. Those 3 boys are never not going to have a home to live in again. Those 3 boys are never going to be without food or without clothes or without opportunities to pursue their dreams. I'm going to do everything in my power. Oh, you're going to screw up. You'll be back in pay. You know, okay, well, you need to leave now. And I kept that. We raised our kids. Our kids, one of the things I'm most proud about is we have 6 kids. They all kind of match up, the oldest, the middle. They're a couple years apart, but they're pretty close. And they're close. They're all close. 5 of them are doing really good. The second from the youngest is going back to prison for the 3rd time. And I just got to understand that God, He has a God. And His God is going to take care of him, I hope, in a manner that he doesn't. He's going to do probably, I don't know, 5 years, maybe 5 years and a couple months. But his oldest daughter is going to turn 18 in that time. His youngest daughter is going to turn 13. He's already missed most of it, and it's really hard. But I'm going to be there. I'm his dad, and I'm going to take care of him. And I'm going to send him money, and I'm going to make sure that he has stuff that he needs to get through that without being codependent or something. But our daughter, we were on our way to go see a Garth Brooks concert. Me and my wife and our oldest grandson. And I was excited. I was really excited. We're halfway down. We're just north of Tonopah. And we get a phone call that our daughter had lost her baby girl that she wanted so bad. And we turned around and we came home. And we were able to comfort her. And we were able to be there. And I was never able to be there for difficult stuff. 3 years ago, was it 3 years ago that Travis got shot? My son's bullshitting with another couple, him and his wife. And my wife's friend, she married a black man, and he was from the inner city. And he said, "Hey, what are you guys doing this weekend?" And my son said, I'm going to go fishing. And his kid said, well, I've never been fishing. He goes, well, let's go. Come on, come with me. They're north of Redding. They get done fishing. They got their old ladies. They got their 2 daughters with them. And this white supremacist guy comes out of the woods. And he starts cursing at Marcus, and Marcus bows up, and all of a sudden the guy pulls out a gun, and Marcus turns and runs, and he shoots Marcus twice in the back. And my son charged him, and he got shot 4 times. He got shot once in the hand. His testicle got blown off. He got shot in the stomach, and when he got shot in the stomach, they think he got turned around. He got shot about 8 feet away with a 9mm right in the back of his head. And they told me he was going to die that night. And it took me forever to get up there, because when there was a shooting, they don't know what happened yet. And they wouldn't let me get up there. And finally, some security guard talked to the cops. They go, no, we got the guy that did the shooting. His dad can go up there. And I went up there, and his head was just swollen like that. And they told me that, hey, there's nothing you can do. We'll call you if anything happens. Well, at that time, I didn't own a cell phone. It just broke down about a year ago. And I started to drive home to Susanville because I wanted to be with my wife, and I got about 20 miles outside of Redding. I turned around and I came back. I got a motel room. I called the hospital, said, hey, this is my number. They called me and they said, hey, we have to do emergency surgery. He's probably not going to make it. And I said, can I come up there? And I went up there and I sat in a room for 4 hours. And I was wondering if my son was alive or dead. And the doctor came in and he showed me these pictures of my son's brain. They had zipped his whole head, peeled his scalp back, drilled his skull, showed me in the back of the head. They go, got really lucky because the bullet just fragmented and it went through his brain. They showed me all these black spots in his brain, and he says, I got a good feeling about this. He goes, 10, 15 years ago, before Afghanistan and Iraq, he'd have been dead. But we've learned a lot in the last 15 years. All them poor kids that have had all that stuff happen to them. And then 3 days later, they told me that he was never going to talk again. Or if he did, it would be very hard to understand. He could probably understand partial sentences, but he was probably going to take months, if not years, to learn how to walk. And I got pissed, and I said, you don't even know who you're dealing with. If I have to deal with that, I will. But as of right now, I'm calling it, he's going to have 100% recovery. And I got up and I walked out of the trauma thing. And a nurse followed me out, and she, I know how bad this is, and you just got to be accepting. We're trying to give you the best information. And 38 days later, he walked out of a rehab down here in Auburn. He can understand. He can talk. He has some anger issues. He has some PTSD. He got married to the girl that he was with. Not my favorite person, but they had a little girl, my 13th grandchild. And through all of that, I never thought of drinking. I realized that what I was supposed to do was to be there for my other children and my wife, and to try to be as strong as I could. And the only way I could be strong was by asking God for help. I had enough of Richard out of the way by working the steps over and over and over that I could rely on God. One of my favorite authors a long time ago, a guy said, man, if you want to learn how to meditate, don't ask people in AA, because very few people do. He said, go ask a Catholic priest. I'm like, shit, that seems a little extreme. But I came up with this great idea that I'd buy a book from a Catholic priest. And I did, and I didn't much like it, but a week later it said, if you like this guy, you might like this guy one more time. And that guy taught me how to meditate. It was just incredible how easy it was for me to fall into a book called Open Mind, Open Heart. And I started, I knew I have a relationship with God. The answer is God. What's the question? I always have that relationship. They told me to go look for God, and I found God in the last place that anybody would think of ever putting God. And I searched and searched. One day I'm reading the big book, and it says, we found the great reality deep within. In the last analysis, the only place you're ever going to find God is deep inside of yourself. And the only way you can access that God is, much like my bride said, is to get enough of you out of the way that God can shine through. You only get to do that by helping other people. What time did I start? I want to talk.
You got 5.
Huh?
4.
4 minutes? All right. I really wanted to talk. So I want to talk about step 10. Step 10 says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We make amends quickly if we have harmed anybody. We talk to somebody else if we need to, and then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. The real trick in that is to resolutely turn your thoughts. But I was reading another book, and I was taking a guy through the steps, and I started to become real fascinated with that word watch. Continue to watch. Watch is a lot different than look at it after it's happened. Watch is to check in with my thinking several times throughout the day. Say, what are you thinking, Richard? Are you thinking kind thoughts? Good, keep doing that. Are you thinking about how you're getting screwed over, or I'm not getting recognition, or am I thinking negative thoughts? Yeah. What does that make you feel like? Are you thinking of saying or doing something that you need to make amends to? Because if all I got to do is check in with my thinking and find out, you know what, I don't have to make amends for my thinking, but I can at once ask God to turn my thoughts to someone I can help. And the more I do that, the less, when I turn my thoughts to check in on them, the less I have those things happening. I think it's like a kid getting caught in a cookie jar. You know, it's like, oh, I don't want to get caught doing that again. So my mind's not doing it as much, it seems to me. And, you know, I could just go on and on. Step 11 to me, they used to say when I got sober that steps 10, 11, and 12 were the maintenance steps. Nothing could be further from the truth. If you're doing those steps, you're growing. You're growing in ways that I had no idea it was even possible. I didn't have a really good time with meditation until I was about 15 years sober, and I was listening to Myers Raymer talk one time, and he talked about, spending about 30 seconds with God in the morning on his way, back in his car up, and I thought, man, I don't think I'm doing a whole lot better, and I couldn't do it no more. And I started to really apply myself. Meditation's about discipline. Everybody says, oh, my mind's too busy. No, it's not. It's about discipline. Start with 5 breaths. Go up to 15. When I get up, I do 20 minutes because that's what Father Keating said to do. But I don't think I get anything more out of 20 minutes than I would have maybe 8 minutes. It's just my practice. And if God tells me, hey, I want you to do something else with that time, I'm open to it. But for a lot of years, I do 20 minutes upon awakening. I use the restroom, and then I sit quietly in the sacred stillness because it's so, there's so much space between my thoughts and my actions through the rest of the day if I just start my day in the quiet. And it's just so important to me to do that, I get up, I don't have to be at work till 6:50, 6:30 on a couple days, but I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so I have that time to spend with my Creator. Says I got 2 minutes. I'm going to talk about step 12. On page 97 in the big book, it talks about you may have many nights' sleep interrupted. You may have to go to courts and sanitariums. Your wife may say she neglected you. You might have to fight with a drunk. You might have to administer sedatives under a doctor's orders. Well, we don't do that shit. None of us have to do that anymore. That's done by hospitals and dryouts and everything like that. But you seriously can't spend an hour or an hour and a half a week, take 1.5 hours out of the 168 hours a week that we have to live in, and not work with another man or another woman, and get that freedom from getting out of yourself and really, really, really trying. You're robbing yourself. You're robbing yourself if you're not doing that. You're robbing yourself. There's a lot of people that need help. And there's another part to the 12th step where it says practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, what principles? Integrity, honesty, perseverance, acceptance, but mostly service. Mostly service. I was at State Line last year, and a guy turned me on to a book called Stumbling in the Right Direction. It's my favorite daily meditation book I've ever read. And at the end of each daily meditation, Don M. says, I love you all.